Continuing from my 2017 sound sculpture Migaloo Song, I intend to design and build a large-scale sound sculpture music box with a pre-sequenced progression of chimes that will be entered into the 2018 Swell Sculpture Festival on the Gold Coast. The sculpture will be based on coral formations, creating a large, moving, kinetic, man-made coral piece out of steel, mirrors and succulent plant life called Poseidon's Music Box. I will take design cues from both coral and succulent formations and integrate the music box parts into the design. The whole sculpture will be silver, black and contain some surfaces covered in mirrors and succulent plants, helping blend the man-made and natural elements of the sculpture. The whole structure will be powered by solar renewable energy and to turn the music box and light the structure at night time. The piece of music generated from the sculpture will be relaxing, in contrast with the social noise and chatter of approximately 15,000 patrons visiting the Swell Sculpture Festival every day in September. As I progress with my sculpture work, I am setting myself up with a profile of kinetic sound sculptures and geometric design work based on mathematical patterns found in nature. My previous work, Migaloo Song, was based on the Fibonacci sequence with a series of circles, and the song was composed to mimic and coincide with the humpback whale songs. The coral formation sculpture is based on regular quadrilaterals, the rhombus, dihedral groups, and will follow design cues from both coral formations, microbial life, and succulent plant life. My interest in the construction of musical instruments has always been based on the physics of sound and acoustics, and my interest in sculpting and sound sculpture has been developed through my collection of music boxes and Leonardo da Vinci inspired machines over the years. I see the concept of moving towards sculpture and sound sculpture more of an addition to my music career rather than a new field. I'm not overly interested in simply creating sculptures, but more so incorporating music composition, music technology, and acoustics into my sculpture. Rather than simply creating sonic environments, my interests are in musical elements and scores to be integrated into the sculptures, using my background in acoustics, physics, and as a musician, composer, and a producer. The connection with natural elements and the environmental activism is also important to me, mimicking and taking cues from nature and design and recreating these repeating patterns in my design, while attempting to enact some change and awareness in the audience in relation to the environment. Overall, the sculpture has a few aspects, but the integration of sound sculpture work in the form of a playing musical score, powered by renewable energy, approaches the topic from a basis of environmental statement against coal mining and directly how it's affecting our Great Barrier Reef, bringing coal bleaching issue to the audience and making a bold connection between the coal mining and Australia. The sculpture will be powered by renewable, recycled solar energy, showing some solutions available to solve our energy crisis and avoid the reef system being killed by the use of fossil fuels and in turn climate change. In direct response to our government's statements that renewable energy is noisy and ugly, I will also be showing that renewable energy device can be aesthetically beautiful, fitting into the landscape down at the beach at Currumbin on the Gold Coast, and sound musically pleasing while generating energy. I will also be able to use the power to generate to run some LED screens that explain the issues we are facing with mining in this country and what people can do to help push our government towards renewable energy. What I have found recently through the research and exploration of the field of sound sculpture is the importance of the environment and audience in relation to these pieces. The aspect reappears constantly in the discussion of sound sculpture. Ross Bant discusses the location of the environment of sound sculptures in relation to the audience as one of the important driving factors in the 1991 journal on public interactive sound sculpture. The concept that the recorded and performance-based music world is often stationary and inanimate, situated in concert halls or in front of a stereo system, that sound sculpture can allow participation from the listener and respects the listener as a creative participant. The practice of sculpture myself is based on engineering, mechanics, and musical acoustics. Although the aesthetic design is integral to my creations, I've always taken cues from nature and my surroundings, and I am fascinated by the geometric designs in nature, from the microscopic through the planetary evolution and forces that shape them. My interest in the biology of life and its combination with physics has been reinforced through my astrobiology work, and I have a drive to recreate this in my sculptures. The fabrication and construction work with my hands also provides a meditative practice for me and allows me to rest mentally. For art curator Shannon Galpin, the importance of public art is that it can bring art outside the galleries and place it in our everyday lives, inspiring and invoking change, illuminating activism and the spirit of hope in the public as they engage with it, visually sets amongst the everyday environment. Public art can surround us and create conversations and controversy. It forces us to have an opinion as we try and understand its purpose, starting a two-way conversation. Public art can reach people that may not have previously engaged with art and change their perceptions on certain topics, amplifying the voice of the artist. The sculpture, while fitting into the sound sculpture field, will be a machine that creates wonderment and curiosity to the audience. This in turn helps bring the viewer into understanding the concept behind the art and draw their own conclusions from the visual and auditory stimulation. The concepts of climate change in relation to the mining and the environment are common knowledge, and it is my hope the audience will connect this from the viewing of the piece. The sculpture and the research attached to design and implementation will help contribute to a broader body of knowledge for future sound sculptors and art activists. Through my research and ideation of the project, I will be documenting and providing insight into my processes and perspectives on both art design aspects and how I intend to integrate the environmental activism outcomes through my art. The artist Sans Mazzanani talks about the significance of the artist's identity and how it becomes as important as the work itself. The understanding of the perspective in which we come from defines the context of the work, and possibly through understanding and education, we can better derive a foundation for our own art. Through my work with this piece, I hope to provide a case study for others to better work through their own perspectives on how to integrate their intentions into their own art. I would like to ask, what is the world like today when you created your art, and how can there be potential for change through your art? The medium of sculpture itself, the physical art space, creates a relationship between the artist's perspective and intention and the viewer. The physical creation forms spaces for conversation and exchange. A new narrative can be formed that engages the viewer to think about the topic of climate change and how their actions are affecting the living organisms that form the coral reefs. I will be attempting to use sound sculpture in my creative practice to create a new narrative on the topic of climate change, a new set of questions to ask the audience through my art. Velma Golden expresses that art can be used to create a new narrative in a presentation, how art gives shape to cultural change.
I was interested in the idea of why and how I could create a new story, a new narrative in art history, and a new narrative in the world. And to do this, I knew that I had to see the way in which artists work, understand the artist studio as a laboratory, imagine then reinventing the museum as a think tank, and looking at the exhibition as the ultimate white paper, asking questions, providing the space to look and to think about answers.
I intend to engage my role as an artist to be a catalyst for this discussion. My intention is for my role not to be simply a content provider, but as a catalyst for change in thought processes and then direct action. Marcus Ellsworth also believes that art has a powerful role to play in creating change and connecting people with a new truth on the existing topic. In his 2014 TEDx talk, Art as Activism, he explains that art is a bringer of change. It is a way of connecting people, inspiring, motivating, and moving people's opinions. That we can use our art to express our truth and enact some change. I see my sculpture work as a chance to get out and tell my truth, unapologetically, and without censoring myself to make the world a better place. Dr. Tammy Brown suggests that the role of art in pushing for freedom, using art to educate and uplift in the video presentation, art as a weapon for social change.
Art is a weapon for social change. I believe that art has the power to counteract and transcend racism, sexism, classism, or any other ism that comes to mind. I believe that music, dance, poetry, painting, photography can help bring peace to this nation and this world.
Socially and politically engaged art strives to provide a counterpoint to the prevailing images of power and the stereotypes that are fed to us by the media on topics such as democracy, civil and human rights, capitalism and the environment. I suggest that all art is in a sense political. It is about a person's views and freedom to act, freedom to express ourselves. Art is about taking a position and encouraging others to feel the same emotion. So how can I make a difference to the environment and climate change with the music in my sculpture? While there have been many commercial attempts to raise awareness for funds for the environment and climate change from famous musical artists, using their presence to encourage others to take up arms, I intend to focus on my own local neighbourhood, expecting a reach globally if over-ambitious. So I intend to put my efforts towards enacting change in the audience that will experience the sculpture firsthand at the Swell Sculpture Festival in September on the Gold Coast, with an expected audience of around 200,000 people. There is a large collective of artists on the Gold Coast in northern New South Wales, and I intend to use my sculpture work to create a collective network of artists that can help drive a more direct change in our local government's thinking in relation to power consumption and renewable energy. As an artist, it is important for me to have a voice, to be able to express myself. Most artists I have met are driven to do this, to share their emotions with the world. Oscar Wilde was quoted in saying, "All art is quite useless." While he was most likely being glib, I believe it is simply finding purpose or understanding in art that defines its use. Art allows for something that cannot be defined easily. It is difficult to quantify or qualify how any one person will see your art or predict the ways in which it will affect people. In contradiction to Oscar Wilde, Friedrich Nietzsche said that we have the art in order not to perish from the truth. I think art has the ability to take from the past and present and help define what is now and how the future can be. In Wilson's 2016 article on the purpose of art, he quotes the British artist Anthony Gormley in relation to art. Art is about one person's expectation of and their use of their own freedom to act. Wilson also quotes composer Paul O'Neill in relation to great art and emotional response. The purpose of art is to create an emotional response in the person that is exposed to that art. And there are three categories of art: bad art, good art, and great art. Bad art will elicit no emotional response in that person that is exposed to it. A song you hear in the elevator that does nothing to you. A picture on the wall that gives you the same emotional response as if the wall had been blank. A movie that chews up time. Good art will make you feel an emotion that you have felt before. You see a picture of a forest, you remember the last time you went fishing with a dad. You hear a song about love and you remember the last time you were in love. Great art will make you feel an emotion you have never felt before. Seeing the Pieta, a world-famous sculpture by Michelangelo, can cause someone to feel the pain of losing a child even if they've never had one. Perhaps the best art should ask you what you think, prompt you to ask questions and put you into doubt. Katerina Gregos suggests that art cracks open cemented opinions and challenges the given. It moves beyond the expected and the known and functions as the conscious of society. It gives voice to the other. Art highlights important ideas, problems and issues that are sidelined or silenced due to political or economic interests. Art functions as the barometer of society, as a moral or intellectual resistance. In her TEDx talk, she presents the following ideas.
Art thinks about the world in its current state, and it can reimagine the world as it should be. More importantly, art is the last frontier of unregulated free expression, which is particularly important at a time when the commons, public space, and information are increasingly being privatized and regulated by the neoliberal order. In that sense, art is born of and advocates freedom. Artists always see a world full of opportunities, chances, potentials, possibilities, and prospects. Their ability to go beyond the possible and into the imaginable should be an example and an inspiration for us all.
In direct relation to my art as sound sculpture, Georgina Bourne discusses the extension of sound installation art in her book Music, Sound and Space Transformations of Public and Private Experience. The emergence of sound installation art in the second half of the 20th century reflects fundamental shifts within multiple arenas. Conceptions of space and space-time, the ascendancy of sight within the oral imagination, the extent of music and sonic arts into expanded sculptural and architectural models, and the role of the public in relation to the aesthetic experience. And Niels van Tom discusses his added importance of sound art in his article, Radical Sound Activism. What is it about sound that's actually able to register a type of critique that may be different from vision, for example? There's a certain kind of intimacy with sound. It moves throughout time. It does, in fact, register the evolution and layering of ideas. He also goes on to say, it is valuable that people become aware of the emotional relations they have to themselves, to each other, and the conditions they're experiencing. That effective levels become a form of analysis. It is by registering these things that you're also able to have an additional level of critical reflection. I would suggest that my work with sound sculpture can also blur the lines between activism and art by interrogating the environment and politics that relate to my community. Creating interest through the use of sound and music within my sculpture will bring a more interest and create a deeper need for understanding of the piece. Making art is bringing something to the world, and sound sculpture is combining music in the physical form in the guise of wonderment. My own searches for works relating to or being called sound sculpture, I found that works can either generate sound and sonic textures, including noise or harmonious sounds, such as the oleos, works that are machines and perform structured or pitched musical pieces, such as the Music Box at the Figment Interactive Sculpture Garden in New York, and also works that are simply visual representations of sound, such as Pendra's sound waves. Any one of these three definitions can represent sound sculpture, and it seems that simply including or representing sound in a physical sculpture can define a sound sculpture. My interest is from a musical, composition and producer background, and therefore strongly situated in the second definition, creating moving kinetic sculptures that perform a pre-composed piece of music. I'm also interested in having these kinetic sculptures powered by either natural forces or renewable energy. Like mentions that David Troop called sound sculpture sound combined with visual art practices, and that Schultz mentioned, it is an art form in which sound has become material within the context of an expanded concept of a structure. For the most part, works that are sound, space shaping, and space claiming in nature. Also that sound art holds the distinction of being an art movement that is not tied to a specific time period, geographic location, or group of artists, and was not named until decades after its earliest works were produced. Indeed, the definition of term remains elusive. Through my work on this project, I hope to form a better definition of sound sculpture in relation to my own work and put it into perspective with my professional music career. At this stage, my definition of sound sculpture is anything physical that generates an auditory tones. I disagree that sculptures simply visually representing sound waves are sound sculptures. I am inspired by the new, and I tend to be drawn to other sculptors that work the same way instead of simply recreating forms, designs, and mediums that have been created before. One of my inspirations for kinetic sculpture work is Anthony Howe. I enjoy the connection between his geometric work and nature and attempting to mimic that in my sculpture work. There are many kinetic works online, and these form a basis for my reference. I hope to create a style and a profile for myself as a sculptor with the integration of musical pieces, simple colour systems, renewable energy, and a connection to the environment and nature. I like the interactivity and integration of natural elements in Steve Mann's hydrofoam. It serves three main roles: as an architectural display fountain, like other fountains that are visually define a landmark, iconic representation or the like. It provides an aquatic play experience that invites people of all ages to play in the water, and also is visual art sculpture and sound sculpture and a musical instrument, thus bringing art, music, culture and play into the mix. Harry Bataille's sound-producing visual works are very interesting. Although he is not aware of his genre sound sculpture at the time of his creations, he is quoted in saying the following: "Man is not important. Humanity is what counts, to which I feel I haven't given my contribution. Humanity shall continue without me, but I'm not going away. I'm not leaving you. Every time you see some treetops moving in the wind, you will think of me, or you will have some beautiful flowers and you will think of me. I've never been a very religious man, not in the formal way, but each time I took a walk in the woods, I felt the presence of a superior force around me." As I mentioned earlier, I like the sisters Kelly and Ashley Golar's music box and its interactivity. Everyone these days listens to music digitally. It's very individual, Ashley said. We want to make it collaborative, so in order to play the song, two people have to turn the handles. Other kinetic pipe organ structures I have a source for inspiration include the wave organ by Peter Richards and George Gonzalez in San Francisco, which uses wave and tidal movements that amplify the sound of water in the ocean. The Singing Tree by Tolkien Liu Architects in Burnley, UK, a collection of steel pipes that utilise the wind to create sound. The Aeolus Project at the Eden by Luke Jerem in the UK, and the Zeta Sea organ by Nikola Basic at the town of Zeta in Croatia. In relation to sound activist artists, Crystal talks about composer John Luther Adams' work with Celia and the effect of sound and music on environmental activism. Music is no alternative to environmental activism or climate science, or direct exposure to melting ice caps, rising seas and cataclysmic winds, but it can compose climate change sensations that directly affect our listening, feeling and thinking. It can even, I venture, redirect our attention outside ourselves, to which to say outside the ubiquitous. Music-saturated commercial environments and our global local web of news and social media that tend to be self-enclosing and all-absorbing. While I find this work interesting, my professional work in the arts has cemented the idea of creating musical works that have appealed to an interest to non-musical people as well as musicians. Simply creating a cacophony of sound and movement is no doubt out, but the lack of cohesive format leaves most non-musical audio-based people uninterested and disconnected. I will be participating in Concert for the Planet on March 24th with my Migaloo song sculpture and as part of the Hotter Choir. The event will feature a globalised performance by the Gold Coast Philharmonic Orchestra, extended to include over 100 local musicians who will perform Holst's The Planets Under the Baton of conductor Lachlan Snow. I intend to use this opportunity to attach some video screens to my previous sculpture in order to derive some direct action and change from the audience. To end, I would like to share more from Katerina Gregos' view on the potential of art from her TEDx talk on why art is important. She says in relation to art that it is a subtle power that changes the world one perception at a time. Art is optimistic because it makes a statement that one person can change the world, and that art as an act of shared communication is in a small way saying, I make the world, I don't simply inherit it.